Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures Podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and today we're going to be continuing my adventures in Sophie, which is my new-to-be Sprinter camper van, as I tootle around the United States during a pandemic. You'll learn insights as to what it's like to travel during this crazy time, as well as about some cool destinations. So let's get started. When we last left, I had pulled into Devil's Den State Park late afternoon. I'm tired from driving. I'm about an hour from decent civilization up a mountain, and I pull in to find out I've been a little bit too complacent about not making any plans. But before I tell you about that, I do want to tell you about Hot Springs National Park. I forgot to tell you about that, and I actually did see that prior to my Petit Jean adventure. So now, Hot Springs National Park, usually when I think of national parks, I think of really big, expansive landscapes. This is not it at all. It's actually a very small national park, or it's our nation's smallest, as a matter of fact, and it borders the town of Hot Springs. It's famous because it had the mineral-filled springs that people would love to go to for the medicinal benefits that were believed. The sign there says it is actually the nation's first national park, because President Andrew Johnson set aside the land as a national reserve in 1832, 40 years before Yellowstone was made a national park. So they both claim first dibs for the national park status. But in fact, Hot Springs was not declared a national park, not just a reserve, until 1921. So you get there and you see the row houses of the old bathhouses, these magnificent architectural gems that it's cool just to see those. But again, still with COVID, I'm a little bit anxious being around people. I'm trying to keep my distance because I don't want to get it, but also because I am traveling, I don't want to be a carrier. So whenever I see any congregations of people, I just kind of back away, and I'm doing the whole mask thing. But again, I don't stay around any kind of populated areas or crowded areas at all for any length of time. You know, I've been doing a lot of drive-bys, and I will continue to do that on this trip, just for safety's sake. Like I said, I don't want to be Typhoid Mary. Most of the bathhouses are closed these days, but you can still check out the architecture of some of them, including the visitor center, which you can get a really nice view. And there is one that you can still go to as a traditional bathhouse. Its heyday was back in the early 20th century, when it was believed that the minerals in the hot springs aided in curing assorted illnesses and promoted good health. And while most bathhouses are no longer used for this purpose, you can see what they look like by visiting the former Fordyce Bathhouse, which now hosts the visitor center. Currently, at the time of this recording, only the Buckstaff operates as a traditional bathhouse, but some hotels do offer baths, so you can inquire while you're at the visitor center. I thought it was funny. There's a sign. The baseball teams used to come here and do some training. And back in the days when the athletes weren't, quote unquote, as hardcore athletes, these heavy drinking professional baseball players loved training in Hot Springs because they could go get loaded the night before, and because they believed the springs would help them the next day with their hangovers. So they even got a sign commemorating this downtown. In fact, throughout the downtown, you're going to see all sorts of interpretive signs about the ball players and the gangsters that frequent in this area. They even have a gangster museum. On the corner of Central and Fountain is DeSoto's Rock. This is a boulder commemorating the Native Americans who named this place the Place of Hot Waters, and DeSoto the Explorer. It's said that Hernando DeSoto and his party first soaked in these hot springs in 1541, and they began this whole tourist tradition. The downtown itself, while touristy, is charming and it's worth a stroll. And just up above is a lovely grand promenade, which acts as a transition between the town just below and the trails up above. There are also several trails to explore. Begin by checking out the Hot Water Cascade. It's a brief climb. Here you're also going to see the unusual and striking blue-green algae, one of the few species that can tolerate these hot waters. You can also walk the Tuffa Terrace Trail near Cascade, which will take you by numerous springs, but they're all covered to keep them sterile. If you don't want to stay in a downtown hotel, you can camp nearby at the Gulf of Gorge campground and experience a more traditional national park-like terrain. I'm glad I went to Hot Springs National Park, but I believe a day is certainly enough. Certainly no more than 2 is all you need to explore this area. So I had a brief visit at Hot Springs and Little Rock, and then I head up to Devil's Den State Park, where I was to meet my girlfriend Jane and her daughter Caroline. So I get there after driving, I'm tired, and I pull in and I go in, and like I said, I've had no problem finding accommodations at all, but I have noticed it's getting a little bit more crowded the further west I go. And maybe it's because people are getting more comfortable with COVID, I'm not quite sure. But as the weeks go by, I see more and more people at the campsites and the campgrounds. Not so much the hiking trails. I still very rarely see people on the hiking trails. But anyway, so I go in there and I ask for a campsite for 2 nights. Could he pick me out a pretty one? And he's like, no, I'm sorry, we're full. I'm like, ooh. A, it's like almost an hour to civilization. I just driven up this mountain. I'm tired. And B, I'm supposed to meet my girlfriend and her daughter. So I'm sure my face fell, and it is late in the day. And I said, listen, I've got a van, but I can do primitive. I can do anything. I just would like a place to sleep. So he confers with another ranger, and they said, well, we do have some space at the hike-in site. I said, I'll take it. I'll take whatever. So he tells me where to park, and I park. And he says, once you get there, you just follow the path, and you'll find the campsite back there. Sounds good. I get there. Now I'm loving my little screen porch room. So I grab that, I grab my sleeping stuff, and I grab a cooler of things to bring for dinner and all that. And it's kind of a heavy load because I'm thinking I'm just going to be walking, 10, 15, 20 feet or so. And I walk, and I walk, and I walk. I get to a dry creek bed that looked to be, once upon a time, a pretty decent-sized river. It's almost completely bone dry. So I cross that. Still walking. I'll bet you I've walked now 10 minutes. I am just sweating to death. If I'd noticed this far, I wouldn't have brought all this junk. Again, I'm really tired. I'm like, well, did I miss it? And then I see a woman walking towards me. I said, have you seen any campsites anywhere around? And she's like, no, I was just out on a hike. She said, but I did see a turnoff. I said, all right. So I go a little further, still carrying all my junk. And I see the turnoff. So I go up there. And then all of a sudden, I do start seeing some campsites. And what I do also notice is really overgrown. It doesn't look like it's been cut back at all this season. So the grass, I'm thinking ticks everywhere. It's hot. We're still in the middle of summer. And I said, well, I'll deal with everything else tomorrow. Tonight, I'm just going to find some place to sleep, and I'll see. So I do see that the campsites are large. They're separated quite a ways in between each other, and they are numbered. So I look for my number 8, which, of course, is down by the end because I think they only had about 10 or 15 total sites on here. And so I go up to my number 8. I take yet another turn. I go up this small little hill, not much. And I come to this clearing. It's actually quite nice outside of being overgrown. And I've got a picnic table, a nice fire pit. I've got a huge, I'd say easily a 50-foot diameter circle campsite. Nice and private. Nobody would even know I'm up there. So I said, oh, this will certainly do. And so I set up my screen porch and pop up my chair. I brought all my luxuries with me, thinking I was, just camping, car camping. Instead, I felt like I was actually backpacking because I'd hauled this stuff. It seemed like 30 minutes. I don't think it was that long, but it was over a mile. And I still had to go back and get another truck. So I go back, get some more stuff, haul it up. And I was like, this isn't so bad. It's actually quite nice and private. Just a weed whacker would do wonders for the site. But other than that, it's pretty nice. So I get in and it ends up being quite an enjoyable evening. Lock myself in not when I say lock myself, I zip myself into my screen porch for the night. And then all of a sudden I hear this, hey. So I get up and there's this young boy. And I said, what's up? And he said, would you like some firewood? I was like, sure. I was like, I can't believe this. I was a Boy Scout. Was bringing firewood to campers. Maybe they were moving on and they just didn't feel like hauling it. I don't know, but it's very nice. I ended up leaving that for the next campers because it was too late for me to start the campfire. And anyway, I just thought that was a nice little trail magic. So I go to sleep early because I'm tired, and I tend to go to bed early anyway when I'm doing these camping things. And I don't realize that I have zipped inside the tent with me some guests. I have brought mosquitoes in with me, and while I slept, I got chomped. And I'm not talking just a little bit of chomped. When I'm sitting in the parking lot that next morning waiting for Jane, I counted 42 mosquito bites just on my legs. I couldn't count my back. So I had plenty of things to scratch while I was waiting for she and her daughter to show up. And when they get there, was, of course, a nice reunion. I hadn't seen Jane in forever. And it was just so bloody hot. August in the South is hot. A heat wave in August is really hot and muggy. So we decided instead of hiking that day, we'd just go back to my campsite, which she said was one of her favorite sites, but she also was a little surprised at how much it was overgrown. And we just chilled out and tried to find some shade and just catch up with each other. She had also said that, because Jane's from Arkansas, that she had never seen that riverbed that I'd seen completely dry. It was always full of water. So the drought that I was seeing at many of the parks where the waterfalls were dried up and the creeks were dried up seemed to be an issue in this whole region. So this park, if you go to Arkansas, the two that I've been to so far, the Petit Jean State Park and this Devil's Den, make sure you go to see these. They have beautiful trails, and there's something about the stone that's different than what I'm used to further east. It's more erosive. So they have these nooks and crannies and caves. And the reason they call this Devil's Den, there's this one, like a cavern or this fault line in the soil that you look down, you can feel it. They call it the Devil's Refrigerator or something like that. Because as you walk by, you feel the cold air coming from the deep bowels of the earth. And it's like a slot canyon going down from where you're walking. So you're not looking up to the high walls like you might see out in Utah. You're looking down into this pit, this cold, skinny pit of darkness. There's caves that supposedly the devil would do his dance and things in, and it's just a really, really beautiful landscape. And I sure want to go back again when it's not so dry and I can take advantage of seeing the waterfalls and the rivers and all that. It's one of Jane's favorite parks, and she's an avid hiker and knows that state like the back of her hand. So I highly recommend that park. I find when I'm looking at my atlas trying to decide where to go next, I'm attracted to interesting names. So the Devil's Den State Park surely fits the bill. Not only did Jane recommend it, but also another one of my Active Travel Adventures listeners as well. There's a bit of confusion as how Devil's Den got its name, but Larry at the Visitor Center was telling some of the guys from Colorado in line ahead of me that they think it's because some bad dudes used to hide out in this area. In fact, the reason I was in line anyway was to get hiking directions to a hidden abandoned still that Jane had told me about when we met on Saturday. But was this park named for robbers and other bad guys, or was it something a little bit more devious? After hiking the absolutely mesmerizing Devil's Den Trail, I could also imagine it being because of all the geological rock formations that one could imagine the devil hiding out in. The Devil's Den Trail is only 1.5 miles, but it packs in a lot of interest in that tiny hike. Features of the trail include the haunting Devil's Den Cave. You come to this really large opening in the bedrock that gets smaller and smaller as it makes a hole down below. It would make a great home for the devil. Of course, it gets really hot in Devil Land, so no doubt the devil cools off in the Devil's Icebox, that inverted slot canyon thing I mentioned earlier. You can feel it before you actually see it. As I turn a bend, I feel delicious cool air, and I mean air-conditioned cool air. You look over down and to your right, and you feel like crawling down into this almost slot canyon-like open-top tunnel that, because of the solid rock, must maintain the cool temperatures down below. Oh, I don't know, a long time ago, I remember somebody telling me that regular groundwater runs 54 degrees, and I'm guessing that may be the same thing with the rock down below. I had the secret desire to move my campsite down there. Not that it would fit, but it was enticing. Another unique highlight of the trail is a massive concave rock outcropping that's high enough that the trail walks right under it. It was like having a half clamshell over on top of you for 100 feet or more. The surrounding vegetation is beautiful as well. You're walking in mixed hardwood forest filled with flora and fauna, some unique to the Ozarks. Most of this trail is fortunately under the shady canopy. However, like I mentioned, northwest Arkansas is under a drought, so almost all the springs and creeks are dry, including Lee River. And this is the river Jane said she never saw dry before. It's been a long time since they've had a good hard rain, and the rain that we had the other day just wasn't enough. So I'm having to imagine what the beauty of the Twin Falls and the Cold Springs look like when they're full of water. Even in this drought, this trail is pretty enough that I would recommend walking it in both directions to get all perspectives. The Yellow Rock Trail is a 3-mile loop that's part of the National Trails System. You get 2 rewards for climbing the 300-foot elevation gain. There's a gazebo summit overlook that gives you a great view of the Ozark Mountains, in the Lee Creek Valley. Yet I liked even better the one on Yellow Rock because it's more open and ledge-like overlooking the mountains. Coming here in the fall would be spectacular because of these views. You cross several creeks. Some are large, but they have got boulders you can hop over. But again, the creeks are so dry, so I can just simply sit in the middle of the quote-unquote creek and take a water break. This trail looks completely different than the Devil's Den Trail. It's brighter with less rocks, and the rocks are more boulders than they are the eroded slate that makes the Devil's Den Trail so intriguing. But at the Yellow Rock Overlook, you get to see lots and lots of slate. It's really lovely. They have a couple of small trails that are like the CCC. Remember I told you about that? That's the Civilian Conservation Corps that built this park and many other parks in the area. So they have an interpretive trail, so you see remnants of the old kitchen and the root cellar, and 2 of the old cabins, number 17 and number 18, have been modernized, and you can rent these along with the other newer cabins. These are as nice as any cabins I've seen in any park, and I'll put a picture on the website. Backpackers, you may want to tackle the 15-mile Butterfield Trail. It has campsites about every 5 miles, so you can make a leisurely couple of days out of it. But you got to check in first with the park office if you want to hike this trail. That is where the hike-in trails are, and that's how I had to walk so far to get to my campsite, because I was actually taking camping sites from the Butterfield Trail. They also have some horse and bike trails as well, and some special non-park trails, like to that Moonshine Still, that you can get that information at the Visitor Center as well. And like many of the parks I've been seeing, they have a pool and a playground and a camp store, so these are not mommy-poppy parks. They have got a lot of amenities. I found, since I'm by myself all day, I have plenty of time to think, and I love being away from the bugs in my screened-in camping porch tent. And once it gets too dark to read, I just simply lie down and listen to podcasts until I fall asleep. And one thing I've noticed, I haven't seen any other solo campers on my trip so far. Mostly I see retired couples in their RVs. Hardly anyone's using the primitive sites. It's rare for me to see a pop-up tent anywhere. I guess since you can drive right to the campsite, why not pay the extra $10 and have a bit more comfort? On weekends, I'll see families, occasionally during the week, but usually that's a weekend thing. And then I think I saw a couple gals, primitive camping ones, and 2 guys, but I didn't know how they were camping. I just saw them together. I haven't seen any solos. I think that's really strange. I also think it's strange that I haven't felt lonely at all on this trip, even though I've been gone for weeks. I hardly talk to anybody except to order my campsite. I think it's because I'm outdoors so much. When I'm home, I'm by myself all day too, but after a few days of not talking to somebody, I start getting a little squirrely, and then I have to go out and meet some friends or do something, just talk to somebody. But I haven't found the need to do that on this road trip, which I find very interesting. Is it because I'm outside all day and I'm stimulated by all these new sights and places? Is it because I hardly ever have cellular internet service, so I become detached from these appendages to my body? I don't know. All I know is that the days move really swiftly, I'm never bored, and I've kind of developed my own new rhythm and haven't been lonely at all. That being said, I did love hanging out with Jane and Caroline for the afternoon. So Jane, Caroline, and I were just sitting around my campsite, just swapping stories and all that. And like I said, I had not met her daughter before, and she had not heard the story about how we met. And I believe I've told this once before, but perhaps not. So in case I didn't, so I met Jane for the first time in Damascus, Virginia, when I was about to go out on my first 2-week backpacking trip of the Appalachian Trail with my friend Jerry, who she and Jane were supposed to the following year be through hiking the Appalachian Trail, and they'd asked to join me, and I said, yeah, there's only one rule. No whining. If you've got a problem, you can complain about it once, because we want to know if you've got an issue, but we don't want to hear it all day. I'm hot, I'm cold, I'm tired. You know, that's none of that, because that's going to be a downer for everybody. So no whining. That's the only rule. Jerry said, that's fine. So I meet Jane and her husband And Jerry, I knew, of course, before, and her husband and my late husband and I were there. So the 6 of us have dinner, and that's my introduction to Jane. And so she mentions that she's a nurse, that she's been so busy working, getting ready to take 2 weeks off, that she hasn't had any time to train. I'm like, that's not a good sign. I've been training like a dog for 5 months at least. I mean, hardcore training. I am as fit as I've ever been in my whole life. And my body's trained for backpacking. I have just overtrained because I did not know what I was doing. This is my first real hardcore adventure. And then, I don't know if it was that night or the next morning, she mentioned she has brought brand new leather hiking boots. Another huge no-no. I mean, her feet are going to become sausage by the end of the day, which they, of course, were because they weren't broken in, and it takes a while to break in leather boots. So she does not complain at all. She puts on her Crocs, and for 2 weeks, she hiked in her Crocs. Huge kudos to Jane for that. And she went way up in my admiration. That's the kind of person I like to do adventures with. It doesn't take long for her to become one of my favorite people on this whole planet. So it was a lot of fun to share that memory with Caroline, and it brought a smile to Jane's face as she got to relive her Type 2 fun adventure. So at the end of the afternoon, Jane wanted to show Caroline and me that there's a moonshine still. Because remember, I told you that there were some bad people who used to live in that area, and there's an old still that there's a trail down to that you can go check out the old still and all that. And it was just so hot. And I was like, nah, I'd rather go the next day. I don't want to start a trek down a mountain and up a mountain at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And Caroline lives here now, so she'd have another opportunity to come, as Jane comes to this park a lot. So like I mentioned earlier, so I go to the visitor center the next day because I said I'll go check it out tomorrow morning when it's cooler. And so I go to the visitor center, and it's off the park itself, but they have directions because it is a little bit of a tourist attraction there. But they said, it's on private land. The people don't mind if you use it, but nobody's maintaining it. And based on as overgrown as my site was this late in the year, so I was like, no way. I'm going to have to do that the next day. In fact, when I talked to Jane, when I saw her a week or so later, she and Caroline were going to do it on their way out, but they looked at that trail and they said, no way. It's for the same reason, no ticks. They did not want to get the ticks. So anyway, this Devil's Den State Park is a really special place, and I encourage you, if you are in Northwest Arkansas, to take the time and take several days at least to explore this magnificent park. I have thoroughly enjoyed my visit at Devil's Den State Park, and now I got to figure out what to do next. I'm up near, actually it's not four corner states, but I've got Missouri almost immediately to my north. Slightly north and west of that is Kansas. Oklahoma is to my direct west. So I got to figure out, what am I going to do? My sister had mailed me something that, it's a medicine that I needed that was going to take almost a week to get here. It's going to mail it to Jane's up in Northwest Arkansas. I was like, well, I don't want to hang out here for a week, and I don't want to impose on Jane. So I said, I think I'll just head north. I'll go up to Missouri. I see a road that I can take, a beautiful mountain road up to a town called Eureka Springs that I did definitely want to see. I'd heard much about. Because oddly, when I stopped at the visitor center, when I crossed into the Arkansas border, I did go in and I asked, what places must I see? I love nature. And this is the woman, she works at the visitor center, a young girl, really. I don't think she was 20 years old. And she couldn't think of anything. Then finally she's like, Eureka Springs? I was like, well, if that's the only place you can think of, I'm going to make sure I see that place, that's for sure. And so now I've got a drive-in day, and of course, now finally we get some rain. They've been in a drought, but there's a front coming through. It's going to be rainy for the next few days. So they need it, but a little harder on the driving, but that's the way it goes sometimes. So I get to Eureka Springs, and it's this funky, artsy community that looks like the perfect girls' weekend getaway town. And like I said, it's with Sophie, it's hard parking her in a small lots and things like that. So I know I'm going to be coming back to this area. So I just did a quick drive through to check it out. Did not even get out of the van at all and headed north. But even the drive is so beautiful up there. The Ozarks are stunning. And I truly understand why Tommy loved them. So I look at the map and I see Branson's not too far away. I was like, well, I've heard of that. That's like a Nashville kind of a place that might be interesting to see. Probably touristy, but still, touristy places are touristy for a reason. So I head to Branson, and sure enough, that's what it was. You get the downtown, and it looks like you are in a little baby Nashville. And they've got an umpteen number of live shows, whether they're going on during COVID. I didn't really stop to see, but if you want to see Dolly Parton or you want to see whomever, somebody's got an act going on, and it's just Music City. It reminded me of like a mashup between Nashville and Myrtle Beach with just a touch of Showtime Vegas to it, all with a little frontier-like historical Western slant. But as cute as that was, my preference still is to the outdoors. And again, during this season, I want to be away from people as much as possible. So even though it was raining, I head to the nearby Table Rock State Park, where I'm lucky to get one of the few remaining campsites. Like I said, in the beginning of this trip, no problem getting campsites. Now I'm finding it's getting a little tougher. So I still don't want to pre-plan because I like the freedom of waking up and deciding, am I going to stick around for another couple of days or am I going to move on? So I've decided not to get myself locked into certain places and certain times, for better or for worse. I have noticed, too, that mask compliance has changed dramatically, where many states in the beginning of my trip, there was no compliance whatsoever. Almost everybody in Arkansas and Missouri are wearing their masks. The second wave is really starting, so I'm trying to keep that on my alert, because if things look dicey, I want to be able to head home. So I'm trying to keep somewhat of an eye on what the second wave might be if it indeed comes. Because like I said, this is new to all of us, so everything's a little bit uncertain, and I'm just trying to make the best choices that I can with the information that I have. I've been trying to be super, super careful to minimize any contact whatsoever as much as I can on this trip. I'm really avoiding restaurants. I don't think I went to a half a dozen in 6 weeks. I try to go outside as much as possible, as I said. Plus, I don't like that, and it's natural. I'm not blaming them. But people tend to touch the outside of their mask, so even if they wash their hands, they're touching the outside of their mask, and then they're touching my plate or my glass. It just kind of creeps me out, because I'm a bit of a germphobe to start with. So I'll be glad, like the rest of us, when all this goes by and we get some semblance of normalcy again. So in the meantime, I pretty much fix my own meals. I'm really enjoying my road trip, and I have a feeling that camping road trips like the one I'm on is going to be especially popular as we come out of the pandemic. And in fact, even during the pandemic for that matter. Because not only do camping trips almost by their very nature practice social distancing, but you're also avoiding being inside where we're told we're more likely to catch the virus. This is an extremely inexpensive way to travel as well. Most of my campsites have been well under $30, plus the gas to get there. I gotta eat, and actually since I'm camping, I'm saving money by not eating out as much as I normally do, or else I should say I normally did prior to the pandemic. And like you, all my travel plans got canceled. I was like, what am I gonna do? Do I get squirrely, locked up in my house, or do I take advantage of the fact that I bought this camper van and can I travel safely during COVID? One drawback of not being at home is sometimes when I can't sleep, I'll get up and I'll have some cottage cheese or a glass of milk or something like that, and it's a little bit more awkward in this situation because normally I'm out my sleeping porch in the rain. I end up spending my first night, I believe it was, sleeping in Sophie up on the little platform foam mattress that I have in there. So I got to climb down and then pull out. It's a chest fridge, which I absolutely love. I'll tell you about that. That it's a Dometic 12-volt refrigerator that's like a chest cooler size that slides under this little seat area that I use to climb up my bed. So there's I'll put the video on the website so you can see what I'm talking about. Anyway, so to do that in the middle of the night, I was like, maybe I'm just a little peckish, so I'll have a little cottage cheese, and maybe that'll help me go back to sleep, blah, blah, blah. Since the weather was forecast to be lousy for the next few days, I didn't even bother setting up my screen porch because I learned at Petit Jean that top just can't handle the rain. It kind of collapses it. So I do have my little fold-up chair that I bought that's got a canopy top on that and little side panels for bug netting. So that works great, and that zips up and out really easily. So it makes a nice substitute when I want to be away from flies and mosquitoes and any of the things that might land on me while I'm reading or relaxing or just look at the water or whatever it is that I'm doing. So that's my go-to when the weather's inclement, because I can toss that in the van real quickly and not worry about things getting wet. At least the rain's cooled things down a little bit, because it's been really hot. And I can't remember if I told you in the last thing, because I don't have air conditioning in my van, unlike most of the RVs that are at the sites. So I went and bought one of those little portable fans. And so I've been coughing up the extra money. It probably cost me an extra $10 a night to have power. But I don't know that my solar would get me through the night on that. I should test it at home. But I didn't test it before then. I didn't want to run out of juice on there. And I was like, well, I'd rather make sure that I've got power in the morning. So I'll pay extra to have the utility hookup at the campsite so that I can run that fan to keep me cool, whether I'm in my screen porch or like tonight when I had to sleep in the van. It makes all the difference in the world, at least to have some circulation of the air. I'm already starting to think that I want to sell my house when I get home and hit the road. It's becoming more and more of a pressing thought in my mind. And like I said, I've got all the time in the world now to think about whatever. And I'm trying to think, what would my life be like if I didn't have a house? And I didn't have to worry about, oh, it's hurricane season, because I always seem to be gone hurricane season like I am right now. And, I have to stop what I'm doing and go back and take care of things. I prepped the whole house as best I could for a hurricane before I left. But if we have a serious storm, there's only so much my yard guy can do for me. I'd have to go back and switch it and worry about it and all that kind of stuff. So if you didn't have a house, all that concern goes away. All you have to worry about is just where you are in the present. And there's something really appealing to that in my mind. And I'm thinking that my next house is going to be the house before the nursing home house. So I want to get this right. I'm really liking Arkansas. So there's been several places on my journey so far that I've been considering, but I think right now the Ozarks and that northwest corner of Arkansas is leading the pack. It's checking all my boxes so far, so I'm excited to see if there's other places that do, but right now I'm really, really intrigued by that. I really want to see this entire country. Well, make that the entire world. So when I make it to Table Rock, that's number 40. Missouri is number 40 of the United States that I've been to. So I'm 80% of the way through seeing chunks of our country. Not in this trip, obviously, over the course of my life. But that is one of my life goals, is to see all 50 states. And I should be able to do that in the next year, I think. I don't have the ambition to see every country in the world. I just want to go to the pretty places where the culture or the landscape really intrigues me. So there's many countries that don't fit either of those parameters. So I'm not going to be one of those people that has that as a life bucket list item. So this Table Rock Lake is formed by a huge dam, which you can drive over, which is kind of cool. And so it's made this massive reservoir. There's not much for hiking. This whole area is built around the water, and it's a massive lake, so it's a place for bringing your paddle boat, kayak, canoe, if you've got a pontoon, and just enjoying the beautiful waterfront. They have some really nice picnic areas, too, around the lake. So I would grab one of those early, because they've got these really nice areas on these concrete platforms overlooking the lakes and the trees. And I imagine they'll go pretty early, even though I was mid-morning and there still were a couple available that families hadn't taken. But it's a really nice way to spend the day. The trail is wide and paved, so I actually thought it was better for biking than walking. I like to walk through the woodland rather than on pavement whenever possible. Even though we've had rain, the creeks are still dry, so I'm not sure how long they've been in a drought, but this rain has not made a dent whatsoever. But droughts always pass, and then we complain about the rain, right? So that's just the way it goes. Sometimes the weather works with you, sometimes it doesn't. The sun's come out, so I decide I'm going to put up my screen porch after all, because the flies are annoying me. And unfortunately, I told you I got chewed up at Devil's Den because those mosquitoes were inside my little porch when I slept, and so they just ate me alive when I was sleeping and I didn't know it. So, and they were bad when I was trying to pack up the porch, even though it goes together really quickly. I was being attacked. So I just kind of crammed it in, and I didn't put it in just right. So unfortunately, I bent or broke something a little bit on that. So it doesn't quite work the way it used to, and it has one funny corner angle and all that. It still works. It's just not quite right anymore. So it looks a little ridiculous. And then I end up having to take a razor and cut a little bit and stake it out a little bit to pull it back out so I had the full headroom on the inside. But I'd rather do that and keep my little porch and keep those mosquitoes out. So it worked just fine, even though it looks a little trashy now. I don't care. I love this porch. I had a little bit of cell reception. I could see that some rain was coming in. So before I went to bed, I was like, nah, I think I don't want to pack up all this stuff wet in the morning. I am just going to tear down camp and sleep in the van tonight, so I don't have to worry about packing up in the wet. And like I said, the screen porch thing was a little bit broken, and so it was even harder to wrap back up. And so a neighbor camper saw my struggle and came over and helped me figure out how to coil the thing back up because I wasn't strong enough to bend both of them. And so anyway, so he was able to manipulate it a little bit to get it so it was working a little bit better because remember these things pop up. So they've got some kind of a coil spring action. They have to be at a certain angle. Anyway, not to bore you. I get the thing back in and then I realized those were the first people I talked to at a campsite except one lady. That's remarkable. I've been gone a long time. And normally campgrounds are very sociable, but that just shows you what it's like when you're traveling now during a pandemic. People just are afraid to communicate. We just do pleasant nods and people are friendly. They just are keeping their distance, so it's harder to have a conversation. And it's made for a different way. It's made travel very different. I'm enjoying my trip, but it lacks that extra that you get from having conversations and sharing stories with people that you meet on the road. So after I get everything packed up, I decide it's time to make some dinner. And I'm getting the things out to prepare my meal. I realize I'm missing one of my forks and knives. Now, mind you, I only brought 2 of each. So losing a set means I'm down 50%. So obviously the last time I'd eaten was lunchtime, and I had leftover fajitas from a lunch that I'd gone out with my girlfriend Catherine, who happened to also be in Bentonville at the same time as I was. And so I must have, when I finished my meal, closed up the little clamshell container and tossed it in the dumpster. I was like, I really don't want to be a dumpster diver. However, I do want my fork and my knife back. So I was like, well, go over and see exactly where you tossed it, because I just put all my garbage in one of the plastic grocery bags and put it in the small dumpster. So I kind of meander over there and I'm poking around. I was like, ooh, mine's kind of right on top. So it wasn't really hard to kind of bend over without going totally in the dumpster to retrieve my stuff. But I felt a little proud of myself, even though it's a little bit gross. But I was glad to retrieve my utensils. After dinner, I look at the atlas and I'm trying to figure out where I want to go tomorrow, and I see Springfield's pretty close by. So I decided I'd like to see that, and also Joplin. And I get to Springfield and I can see it's gentrifying, and I'll bet this is a great time to buy down there right now because the neighborhood, the downtown historic area, is coming back, and you can start to see the artists and some of the restaurants starting to move in, whereas a couple blocks down it's still pretty rough looking. And I like that because it's not a tourist town. I'm getting a little tired of tourist towns. I'd rather just either be outdoors. I'll see them. Like, it was nice seeing Branson, but I wouldn't want to stay there for me. That's my tastes have changed. And I found the same thing with Joplin. Now, Joplin was a happening town. I mean, it was all gentrified. It was all a lovely town in great shape. Yet it didn't seem touristy. You would see a hardware store right downtown in the historic area. You're not going to see that in a tourist town because they can't afford the real estate. So that appealed to me a great deal, that you could see the history, you could see the cute Route 66 signs on the murals and all that kind of thing. And one thing I was happy to see is that it looked like they had made a complete recovery from that devastating 2011 tornado that just wiped out that area. And because neither Springfield or Joplin was touristy, I really enjoyed visiting those towns because I didn't feel I was in a tourist area. I felt like I was where people actually lived, worked, and played. As you can hear in my voice is getting tired, and I'm running a little long, so I will conclude the Sophie Diaries in the next episode, and then I will explain, too, why all of a sudden I had to do an abrupt return home. That was a little bit scary, and I'll be back in 2 weeks to tell you that. From then on, we'll be getting back to the real adventures again. We're going to go gorilla trekking. We're going to go hiking in the North Islands of Japan. I've got some really cool interviews in the tank that I'll be getting out as the season continues on. And starting November 5th, the Adventure Travel Show podcast will be back on air. And we have a special edition on that one that relates to the reason why I had to leave with Sophie and rush back home. And again, you'll hear all about that when I come back in 2 weeks. And so anyways, I hope you've been enjoying learning what it's like taking a road trip during the pandemic. And I hope that you will continue listening and subscribing to the show so that you don't miss future episodes. It won't always be me in a road van, and we'll be back doing regular adventures. But this is a strange time, and I thought that most likely for the next 6 months and perhaps the next year, this is the kind of travel that we can safely do. So I thought it would be helpful to give you a bird's eye view of what it's like to actually do it, since I know many of us are still staying home because we don't know what it's like. Anyhow, I appreciate you listening very much. It means the world to me. You can always reach out to me and tell me about your travels and things that you'd like to hear at kit@activetraveladventures.com. I love getting your emails. It makes my day. And also, because I will be going back out on the road full time, if you would like to get together for a coffee or a hike or a beer or something like that when I'm doing my long-term travels again in Sophie, be sure that I know where you are and how to reach you so that I have a little Post-it note in my atlas of where people live. So as I get near, I connect and we get together. So make sure that you reach out because I want to see you. I appreciate you listening. Thanks again. So until next time, this is Kit Parks. Stay safe and adventure on.